talking about Act 1, Scene 3 of William Shakespeare's play Othello. The scene opens with a whole lot of fanfare in the council chamber that is presided over by the Duke and his senators. A ton of officers are also in attendance, and in a decidedly important meeting, the Duke, um, who is now drawing on the help of Othello to quash the threat of the Turks, who are headed towards, at one point, Rhodes and then Cyprus, or the other way around, um, it is making a decision to go to war. It's late at night, we'll remember. Little time has passed since Brabantio was first told that Desdemona has had this clandestine affair with Othello. Brabantio enters the council chamber and immediately incriminates Othello for having enchanted his daughter with magic spells. The Duke reminds us, I think in a very sort of offhand way, that magic in Venetian society is a punishable offense. It is illegal. So this actually does give Brabantio due cause to be concerned. The Duke gives Othello a chance to defend himself, though. Um, Othello enters and admits that he loves Desdemona and that she, in fact, loves him back. In fact, she was actually enchanted by and pitied by his stories of heroism and adventure. Desdemona is summoned and admits that she also loves Othello, essentially corroborating all of this. In this moment, Othello looks great. Othello asks if Desdemona can come with him to Cyprus under the watch of Iago's wife, Emilia, and Rodrigo, whose plan to have the marriage falsified has now been thwarted, talks of drowning himself. And then Iago, left alone on stage at the end of this scene, delivers his first soliloquy, which we'll talk about. A really, really important piece of character building for Iago. Unlike Iago, we learn that Othello is not doesn't possess the same rhetorical flourish. He reminds us that in little of this world can I speak more than pertains of broil and battle. So in telling his story, he's confined by the words that he knows. This, I think, is important because although the play is called Othello, this is really the Iago show. He is everything that a Shakespearean audience, and really that a writer like Shakespeare, would love in a character. Someone who is sharp with their words, conniving, and charismatic. Othello, on the other hand, is quite bland. Desdemona, we learn, is not so much the charmed, but the willingly encharmed. Othello says in his speech to the council that while telling his stories, this to hear would Desdemona seriously incline. But still the house affairs would draw her hence, whichever she could with haste dispatch, she'll come again, and with a greedy ear devour up my discourse. There would be these times that Othello would, I suppose, go over to Brabantio's house for dinner, and Desdemona was absent. But she would return over and over again with a greedy ear to devour up the discourse. I can't help but return to all of those times that Othello has been called a thief, or it's been implied that he is marrying Desdemona in order to obtain her dowry. And in this moment, it is not Othello who is greedy, who would give up any of the treasures in the sea to have her. It's rather Desdemona who, with a greedy ear, is the one consuming in this case. She's consuming the story. This gives her a whole lot more agency than has previously been granted to her. And then she shows up, and we're actually quite interested by what she has to say. She's convincing. Case in point, when Brabantio suggests that he doesn't understand the reason why Desdemona has switched her allegiance to Othello without explanation. Um, it takes Desdemona and her clever logic to explain it to him. She says, "My noble father, I do perceive here a divided duty. To you I am bound for life and education. My life and education both do learn me how to respect you. You are the lord of duty. I am hitherto your daughter, but here is my husband, and so much duty as my mother showed to you, preferring you before her father, so much I challenge that I may profess due to the more, my lord." I think it's important here to note that she uses a pretty high level of logic to convince, or at least explain to Brabantio, that in the same way that her mother possessed some divided duty to her husband and her father, she now possesses the same. It's almost like the burden of all women who are married off to somehow lose the love of their father and gain the love of their husband. We also get a little bit more of character development for Brabantio. We learn a little bit about him as a character, but we also see a little bit into the views of women in society. Certainly, the way that women are expected to be caged and controlled. Brabantio says, "For your sake, Jewel, I am glad at soul I have no other child, for thy escape would teach me tyranny, to hang clogs on them." He suggests that if he were to have another child, if he had another child, the lesson from the love affair of Desdemona and Othello would be that children, his children, would be better chained in the house. He would be strict and punitive. Challenging thought, I think, for the women in this play. As I've just said, Desdemona actually shows herself to be an exceptionally strong character, and when we meet Emilia, she will be even more so a strong character. She doesn't suffer fools. She doesn't suffer her husband very well either. Um, there is also some foreshadowing to an upcoming challenge for Othello in the play. Brabantio's final words to Othello as he leaves question his ability to observe and understand deception as it is. He says to him, "Look to her more. If thou hast eyes to see, she has deceived her father and may thee," suggesting that there's a possibility that having deceived Brabantio, marrying Desdemona isn't necessarily a safe bet for Othello. She has deceived people in the past. It's interesting because this will become a prophecy that rings true. Othello will, later in this play, perceive um, some type of affair between Desdemona and a character later to be revealed. And a lot of this will rely on Othello's perception. Incidentally, though, Brabantio struggled to observe Desdemona's deception, and Othello will fail to observe Iago's deception. Um, because he thinks of he thinks of Iago in this moment as a man of honesty and trust, which is also ironic, a situational irony, I think. Okay, and now nearing the end here, as all of the characters slowly filter themselves off stage, leaving only Rodrigo and Iago. Iago has to cajole Rodrigo, who is at this point despondent because the marriage between Othello and Desdemona has been granted by the Duke. Iago insists that our bodies are our gardens to which our wills are gardeners. I think what he means here is that man is ultimately composed of emotions, but we are in control of them. He also reminds us later that it is our reason that ultimately decides how we control that will, that impulse to do what we want. It's important here to realize that ultimately Iago is a selfish character, and this is his mantra. Our wills are what define who we are. What we want is what defines who we are. He says on line 328, though, 329, but we have reason to cool our raging motions, our carnal stings, our unbidden lusts. He tries to convince Rodrigo not to be angry in all of this. He also uses his will almost on, in perfect time to get money from Rodrigo. He says to him that he should put money in thy purse, put money in thy purse, put money in thy purse. Fill thy purse with money, make all the money thou canst, make money, go make money. And he reminds him that he hates the Moor over and over and over again. This is all ironic because he is using Rodrigo's own mixed emotions to really get the better of him. Man is guided by his emotion, by his will, by his want, but reason should prevail. The problem, though, is that Rodrigo doesn't seem to have any reason. He ends this speech to Rodrigo by saying it's better to die trying than to die because of emotion. Finally, the scene ends with a very important soliloquy, I think, for Iago's character, and there's more to say about it than what I have here, but ultimately, Iago suggests that it's possible that Othello has been cheating has been cheating with Iago's wife Emilia. Now, what's funny, or perhaps a little disturbing, is that Iago can't actually verify the truth of this belief, but decides that he's going to act on it as if it were truthful anyways. He's going to act on the presumption. This ultimately sets in motion a new plan to ensnare Cassio in a plan. And he decides to make it appear as if Cassio is involved in some kind of far-flung affair with Desdemona. And all of this will serve two purposes. It will enrage Othello. It will anger Cassio, perhaps to the point of some fatal mistake. And ultimately, it is that position of lieutenant that Iago is vying for, we think. The motivations that Iago has in this scene, I still think are unclear. He doesn't really want the role of lieutenant at this point, I think. He seems more intent on upturning Othello's entire life as retribution for not getting the position to begin with. And ultimately, this all hinges on Othello's personality. Iago believes that his plan to ensnare both Othello, Cassio, and Desdemona in this affair plot will work because Othello is of a free and open nature that thinks men honest. And how true is that? He said just recently that Iago is a man of trust and honesty. Well, here's the problem. Othello is gullible. He's willing to believe, he's willing to see people not as they really are, but what as they appear to him. So there's a little bit of appearance versus reality here as well.